Beloved friends, today I ask you to pause, not to listen with your ears alone, but with your spirit. In a world overflowing with abundance, convenience, and appetite, we rarely stop to ask a simple but eternal question. What is this doing to my spirit? We are careful about our careers, careful about our finances, careful about our image, but careless with the very temple that carries the breath of life within us. Many people believe food is only physical. They say it enters the body and leaves the body. But I tell you today, nothing that enters your life leaves without leaving a trace. Just as words shape the heart and environments shape the mind, what we consume shapes the inner man. The body is not separate from the spirit. They walk together. When one is weakened, the other soon follows. We live in a generation that feeds constantly, yet remains unsatisfied. Full stomachs, empty souls, sharp minds, dull spirits, and we wonder why prayer feels heavy, why discernment feels distant, why spiritual hunger feels quiet. Could it be that what we are eating is speaking louder than what we are praying? Some foods do not merely affect the blood or the bones. They affect sensitivity. They slow the spirit. They numb awareness. They invite heaviness where there should be clarity. This does not happen suddenly. It happens slowly, quietly, politely, until one day you realize your fire has cooled and you do not know when it happened. I am not here to speak fear, but responsibility, not condemnation, but awakening. Because when you understand that your body is a living altar, you begin to guard what touches it. You stop eating without discernment. You stop consuming without wisdom. You stop saying, "It doesn't matter," when heaven says, "It matters greatly." Today is not about rules. It is about reverence. It is about recognizing that spiritual strength is not built only in prayer closets, but also in daily choices. And before we go any further, I invite you to open your heart, because what you are about to hear may challenge your habits, but it is meant to protect your destiny. The unseen connection between what we consume and the condition of our spirit is one of the most overlooked truths in modern life. Yet it quietly governs the strength, sensitivity, and direction of the inner man. Many people live with a sharp separation in their thinking, believing the body belongs to the physical world, while the spirit belongs to prayer, worship, and belief. This division feels logical, but it is deeply misleading. The human being is not a collection of independent parts functioning in isolation. The body, soul, and spirit are woven together so intricately that whatever touches one inevitably influences the others. What enters the body does not stop at the stomach. It echoes through the emotions, the mind, and the spirit in ways that are subtle but profound. Every act of eating is an act of agreement. It is a moment where we allow something from outside to become part of us. Over time, repeated agreements shape patterns, and patterns shape states of being. This is why certain foods leave people feeling heavy, restless, foggy, or dull, even when the body appears satisfied. The body may be fed, but the spirit may be burdened. When this happens consistently, spiritual awareness begins to fade, not suddenly but gradually. Prayer becomes harder to enter. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Discernment becomes less sharp. The heart still desires God, but the inner senses that perceive Him grow less responsive. The spirit thrives on lightness, clarity, and order. It responds to peace, discipline, and intentionality. When the body is overloaded, overstimulated, or constantly driven by appetite, the spirit struggles to rise. This is not punishment, and it is not superstition. It is alignment. Just as a physical body functions best when it receives what supports its design, the spirit functions best when the body cooperates rather than resists. Food that excites the flesh excessively, dulls sensitivity, or promotes dependency does not remain a physical matter for long. It begins to influence emotional balance, thought patterns, and ultimately, spiritual focus. Many spiritual struggles that people attribute to lack of faith or weakness of character are, in truth, rooted in daily habits that contradict spiritual hunger. A person may long for depth, clarity, and intimacy with God, yet unknowingly maintain a lifestyle that constantly pulls the inner life in the opposite direction. The spirit is always willing, but it does not operate in isolation from the vessel that carries it. When the vessel is neglected, overloaded, or abused, the spirit is restrained, not because it is weak, but because it is bound to a body that cannot sustain spiritual alertness. Modern culture encourages constant consumption without reflection. Food is marketed as comfort, entertainment, identity, and reward. Eating becomes emotional before it is physical. This emotional attachment is where spiritual influence quietly enters. When food becomes a substitute for peace, rest, or fulfillment, it begins to occupy a space that belongs to the spirit. Over time, the spirit learns to remain silent while the flesh is constantly satisfied. This imbalance creates a person who is externally full but internally restless, always seeking more yet rarely feeling complete. Spiritual sensitivity requires restraint, not denial, but wisdom. There is a difference between nourishment and indulgence, between receiving and surrendering control. When appetite rules without discernment, the spirit loses its voice. The more the body demands immediate satisfaction, the less space remains for patience, reflection, and spiritual listening. The spirit speaks softly. It does not compete with excess. It withdraws when overwhelmed, waiting for the body to quiet down enough to hear again. This is why intentional eating is not merely a health practice, but a spiritual discipline. When a person becomes mindful of what they consume, how they consume, and why they consume, they begin to restore order within. The body learns obedience rather than dominance. The spirit finds room to breathe. Clarity returns not because of effort, but because interference is reduced. The connection between food and spirit becomes evident not through theory, but through experience. The body is not an enemy of the spirit, but it must be guided. When guided well, it becomes an ally, a servant that supports spiritual growth rather than obstructs it. When neglected or indulged without wisdom, it becomes a weight that pulls the inner life downward. This is not about perfection, restriction, or fear. It is about awareness. It is about recognizing that daily choices, especially ordinary ones, carry spiritual consequences. The unseen connection reveals itself most clearly in contrast. When a person cleanses their habits, simplifies their intake, and eats with intention, they often notice an increase in inner quietness, emotional stability, and spiritual alertness. Prayer feels less forced. Reflection becomes natural. The mind clears and the heart becomes more responsive. These changes are not dramatic, but they are consistent. They testify to a truth that has always existed, that the spirit responds to the condition of its dwelling place. Understanding this connection shifts responsibility from external circumstances to personal stewardship. It removes the excuse that spiritual weakness comes only from outside pressures. It restores agency by showing that small daily decisions shape long-term spiritual strength. What we eat, how we eat, and why we eat are not neutral actions. They are conversations with our inner life, either inviting alignment or reinforcing resistance. When this truth is embraced, food is no longer treated casually. It becomes part of a larger vision of wholeness. The body is honored, not worshipped. The spirit is prioritized, not neglected. Balance replaces excess. Awareness replaces impulse. And slowly, without force or struggle, the inner life begins to rise. Not because more was added, But because unnecessary weight was removed, the idea that not all food feeds life and that some quietly drains it challenges a deeply rooted assumption in modern thinking, the belief that nourishment is always neutral or beneficial as long as it fills the body. Many people equate eating with survival, comfort, and pleasure, rarely questioning whether what sustains the flesh might simultaneously weaken the inner life. Yet, life is more than biological continuation. True life includes clarity, vitality, purpose, sensitivity, and inner strength. When food supports only the body but undermines these deeper qualities, it may keep a person alive while slowly diminishing the quality of that life. Some foods create a sense of fullness without true nourishment. They satisfy appetite, but leave the body sluggish and the mind unfocused. Over time, this physical dullness seeps into emotional and spiritual realms. Energy becomes inconsistent. Motivation weakens. Inner discipline erodes. This happens quietly, without obvious warning signs, which is why it is so dangerous. What drains life rarely announces itself as harmful. It arrives disguised as comfort, convenience, or reward. Because the effect is gradual, people adapt to the decline and begin to accept a lower level of vitality as normal. Life is sustained by harmony. When the body receives what supports balance, the inner systems work together. When that balance is disrupted repeatedly, the body survives, but life loses its sharpness. Food that overwhelms the system, promotes excess, or encourages dependency does not immediately destroy health, but it shifts the body into a constant state of recovery rather than growth. The energy that could be used for creativity, reflection, discipline, and spiritual awareness is instead consumed by digestion, correction, and compensation. The body is busy surviving rather than thriving, and the spirit feels this strain even when the mind cannot explain it. What drains life often does so by numbing sensitivity. Sensitivity is essential for discernment, awareness, and connection. When sensitivity is dulled, people become less aware of internal signals. They eat when they are not hungry, seek stimulation when they are tired, and pursue comfort when they need rest or silence. This confusion between need and desire weakens self-governance. Over time, the individual becomes reactive rather than intentional. Life begins to be driven by impulse instead of purpose, and the quiet erosion of inner strength continues. Another way food can drain life is by encouraging imbalance. Life flourishes in rhythm, in cycles of intake and rest, effort and recovery. Constant indulgence disrupts this rhythm. When eating becomes frequent, heavy, or emotionally driven, the body rarely returns to a neutral state. It remains either stimulated or fatigued. This constant fluctuation creates stress, even if it is not consciously felt. Stress narrows perception, reduces patience, and weakens the ability to remain present. A person may still function well outwardly, yet inwardly feel scattered, restless, or disconnected. There is also a subtle psychological effect. When food becomes a primary source of comfort, it quietly replaces other forms of nourishment. Reflection is avoided, silence is filled, emotional discomfort is postponed rather than processed. Over time, this avoidance diminishes resilience. Life feels more fragile, more dependent on external satisfaction. The inner capacity to endure, to wait, to sit with discomfort weakens. This is not a dramatic collapse, but a slow thinning of inner resources. The person still moves forward, but with less depth, less endurance, less quiet strength. Life is not only about energy, but about direction. Food that drains life often blurs direction by clouding clarity. When the body is constantly overloaded, the mind struggles to maintain focus. Decisions become more impulsive. Long-term vision gives way to short-term relief. The ability to listen inwardly diminishes. This loss of clarity affects spiritual life deeply, because spiritual awareness requires stillness, attentiveness, and a certain lightness of being. When the body is heavy and the mind is noisy, the inner voice is easily drowned out. It is important to understand that life-draining food does not always harm in isolation. The danger lies in repetition. Occasional indulgence does not define a life, but habitual excess shapes it. What is repeated becomes normal, and what is normal becomes invisible. People often do not realize how much vitality they have lost until they experience contrast. When they simplify, reduce, or become more intentional with what they consume, they are often surprised by the return of clarity, steadiness, and inner calm. This reveals that the loss was not inevitable, but self-inflicted through unexamined habits. Life-draining food also affects the sense of discipline. Discipline is not harsh control, but the ability to choose what supports long-term well-being over immediate gratification. When food constantly reinforces indulgence, discipline weakens in other areas as well. Focus, consistency, and self-restraint decline. The person may still desire growth, but finds it harder to act on that desire. This creates inner conflict, where intention and behavior no longer align. Over time, this misalignment drains confidence and peace, further diminishing the quality of life. The most dangerous aspect is that life-draining food rarely feels like loss. It feels like satisfaction. This false satisfaction masks depletion. A person feels full, yet remains tired. Comforted, yet restless. Fed, yet unsatisfied. This contradiction is signal, but it is often ignored. When such signals are dismissed repeatedly, awareness dulls further. Life continues, but with less vibrancy, less depth, less inner coherence. Recognizing that some food drains life is not about fear or restriction. It is about truth and stewardship. Life is precious, and vitality is fragile. What we allow into the body becomes part of the environment in which life must grow. When that environment is supportive, life expands naturally. When it is toxic or excessive, life contracts quietly. Understanding this restores responsibility without condemnation. It invites a person to choose nourishment that supports not just survival, but fullness, clarity, and inner strength, and to recognize that every choice either adds to life or slowly takes away from it. The spiritual sensitivity of the human body as more than flesh and bone is a truth that requires a shift in how we understand ourselves. Many people see the body as a container, a shell that carries the real self inside, something mechanical that must be maintained but has little meaning beyond function. This view reduces the body to biology and disconnects it from the inner life. Yet the body is not a neutral vessel. It is alive with perception, response, memory, and influence. It listens, reacts, and participates in the spiritual condition of a person, whether one is aware of it or not. The body is designed to sense more than temperature, pain, and hunger. It responds to peace and anxiety, truth and conflict, order and chaos. When a person enters a calm environment, the body relaxes before the mind explains why. When tension is present, the body tightens before words are spoken. This responsiveness reveals that the body is not separate from awareness. It is an instrument through which the inner life experiences the world. Because of this, what affects the body inevitably affects spiritual sensitivity. Spiritual sensitivity depends on receptivity. To be receptive, a person must be able to perceive subtle signals, quiet impressions, and inner promptings. The body plays a major role in this. When the body is overstimulated, exhausted, or burdened, perception narrows. Everything becomes louder, heavier, and more urgent. The subtle is drowned out by the intense. The body, overwhelmed by excess, becomes less capable of supporting attentiveness. This does not mean the spirit disappears, but it becomes harder to access, like a soft voice in a crowded room. The body carries memory in ways that go beyond conscious thought. Patterns of stress, indulgence, restraint, or discipline leave traces. Over time, these traces shape posture, breathing, energy levels, and emotional reactions. A body trained in excess tends toward restlessness. A body trained in restraint tends toward calm. These tendencies influence spiritual life profoundly. Calm bodies create space for reflection. Restless bodies seek constant stimulation. The difference is not willpower alone, but conditioning. The body learns what it is repeatedly given. Spiritual sensitivity requires a certain lightness, not weakness, but freedom. When the body is weighed down by constant consumption, irregular rhythms, or neglect, it loses this freedom. Movement becomes sluggish. Breathing becomes shallow. Rest becomes incomplete. These physical states affect the inner atmosphere. A person may desire clarity and connection, yet feel blocked, unfocused, or distant without understanding why. The blockage is not spiritual resistance, but bodily interference. The body also responds to intentional care with increased sensitivity. When a person treats the body with respect, listens to its signals, and avoids extremes, the body becomes cooperative rather than demanding. Hunger becomes clear instead of compulsive. Fatigue becomes a signal rather than a crisis. Satisfaction becomes possible without excess. In this state, the body stops competing with the spirit for attention. It settles. When the body settles, the inner life has room to rise. There is a reason moments of deep insight often come during stillness, simplicity, or restraint. In these moments, the body is not overloaded. It is quiet enough to transmit rather than distract. Spiritual sensitivity is not about escape from the body, but harmony with it. When harmony exists, the body becomes a partner in awareness. When harmony is broken, the body becomes a source of noise. Many people attempt to strengthen their inner life while ignoring the condition of their body. They seek intensity instead of alignment. They push harder rather than listen deeper. This approach often leads to frustration because the body resists what it cannot sustain. Spiritual practices feel heavy instead of life-giving. Discipline feels forced instead of natural. The missing element is not effort, but integration. The body must be brought into agreement with the direction of the inner life. The body's sensitivity is also revealed in how quickly it responds to changes in habit. When excess is reduced, many people notice improved clarity, steadier emotions, and greater inner calm within a short time. This response is not coincidence. It is evidence that the body was interfering before and is now cooperating. The spirit did not suddenly grow stronger. It simply encountered less resistance. Understanding the body as spiritually sensitive changes how choices are made. Eating, resting, moving, and even breathing become acts of stewardship rather than routines. The question shifts from what is allowed to what is supportive. This shift brings responsibility without fear. It invites awareness instead of restriction. The body is no longer treated as an obstacle to overcome, but as a field to cultivate. When the body is honored in this way, spiritual life becomes less about striving and more about flow. Awareness deepens not through intensity, but through consistency. The inner life feels accessible rather than distant. Peace becomes easier to enter. Discernment becomes clearer. This does not happen because the body becomes perfect, but because it becomes aligned. Ignoring the spiritual sensitivity of the body leads to confusion. People search externally for answers to inner dullness, not realizing that the issue lies in daily rhythms and physical care. Recognizing this sensitivity restores clarity. It reveals that spiritual awareness is supported by ordinary choices made with intention. The body listens, remembers, and responds. When treated as mere flesh, it resists. When treated as a living, sensitive partner, it supports the unfolding of the inner life in ways that feel natural, steady, and quietly powerful, opening space for depth, awareness, and connection that feels grounded rather than forced, subtle rather than dramatic, and enduring rather than momentary. Modern eating habits have reshaped not only the physical body, but also the inner landscape of awareness, often in ways that go unnoticed. Convenience, speed, abundance, and stimulation define how many people eat today. Food is no longer approached as nourishment, but as entertainment, stress relief, social ritual, and constant background activity. This shift has consequences beyond digestion. When eating becomes habitual rather than intentional, excessive rather than balanced, the inner senses gradually lose sharpness. Spiritual awareness does not disappear all at once. It fades as attention is pulled outward and downward, away from stillness and discernment. One of the most powerful effects of modern eating patterns is overstimulation. Highly processed, heavily seasoned, and sugar-laden foods excite the nervous system. They create spikes followed by crashes, cycles of craving and fatigue. The body becomes accustomed to intensity, and when intensity becomes normal, subtlety feels empty. Spiritual awareness depends on subtlety. It requires the ability to sense gentle impressions, quiet warnings, and inner peace. When the body is trained to seek constant stimulation through food, silence feels uncomfortable and stillness feels boring. The inner world becomes noisy even when the outer world is quiet. Another factor is constant fullness. Many people rarely experience true hunger. Eating is scheduled, social, or emotional rather than responsive. The body is almost always digesting, almost as always processing. This continuous internal activity creates heaviness. A heavy body pulls attention downward, toward comfort and restlessness rather than alertness. Spiritual awareness thrives when the body is light enough to support attentiveness. When digestion dominates the body's energy, the inner life competes for what remains. Modern habits also encourage eating while distracted. Screens, conversations, driving, and work often accompany meals. This trains the mind to disconnect from the act of nourishment. When a person is not present while eating, awareness weakens. This lack of presence does not remain limited to meals. It spills into prayer, reflection, and contemplation. The mind learns to be elsewhere, even when the body is still. Spiritual awareness requires presence, the ability to remain fully attentive without constant external input. Speed is another quiet, dulling force. Fast food, fast meals, fast snacks teach the body urgency. There is little pause, little preparation, little gratitude. Everything is immediate. This rhythm seeps into the inner life. Patience becomes harder. Waiting feels unnatural. Spiritual awareness unfolds slowly. It cannot be rushed. When a person is trained by habit to expect instant satisfaction, the slower movements of the inner life feel inaccessible or frustrating. Excessive variety also plays a role. Endless choices, flavors, combinations. When emotional awareness weakens, spiritual awareness follows. The two are closely linked. A person who cannot sit with emotional discomfort will struggle to sit with spiritual conviction, correction, or calling. Regular overindulgence also weakens discipline. Discipline is essential for spiritual alertness, not rigid control, but inner order. When appetite regularly overrides intention, the inner structure softens. This affects consistency in reflection, prayer, and self-examination. The spirit may desire depth, but the habits of the body resist it. The dullness that follows is often misinterpreted as spiritual dryness, when in reality it is physical and habitual resistance. Modern eating habits are often disconnected from rhythm. Late-night eating, irregular meals, and constant snacking disrupt natural cycles of rest and renewal. When the body lacks rhythm, the inner life lacks rhythm as well. Spiritual awareness flourishes in rhythm, in patterns of engagement and withdrawal, action and rest. Without rhythm, everything blends together into one continuous state of mild exhaustion. Another subtle effect is loss of reverence. When food is treated casually without awareness or gratitude, it reinforces a general attitude of casualness toward life itself. Sacredness is replaced with utility. This attitude extends inward. Spiritual moments feel ordinary, easily interrupted, easily postponed. Awareness dulls not because the spirit is absent, but because reverence has been eroded by habit. Over time, these effects accumulate. The person still believes, still prays, still seeks, but with less sharpness. Inner signals are slower to register. Discernment feels delayed. Peace feels distant. This is not a failure of faith, but a consequence of daily conditioning. The body has been trained for stimulation, fullness, speed, and excess, and the spirit must work through that training to be heard. When modern eating habits are adjusted even slightly, many people are surprised by how quickly awareness begins to return. Not because something new is added, but because interference is reduced. Spirit was never gone. It was simply muted by habits that pulled attention away from inner quietness. This reveals how closely daily consumption is tied to spiritual clarity, and how ordinary choices can either sharpen or dull the ability to perceive what is subtle, meaningful, and deeply alive. The danger of treating food as neutral is subtle because neutrality feels safe. When something is labeled neutral, it escapes examination. Many people assume that food is morally and spiritually empty, that it simply provides energy and pleasure without influencing anything beyond the physical body. This assumption allows habits to form without reflection. Eating becomes automatic, driven by availability, craving, or routine rather than discernment. Yet nothing that enters a person repeatedly remains neutral. Over time, it shapes patterns, responses, and inner states. Whether acknowledged or not, neutrality removes responsibility. If food is seen as spiritually irrelevant, then there is no reason to ask deeper questions about its impact. This mindset creates a gap between intention and practice. A person may seek clarity, discipline, and inner strength while consistently engaging in habits that undermine those very qualities. The conflict is not obvious because the cause is hidden behind the belief that eating choices do not matter beyond health or enjoyment. This belief prevents self-examination and allows quiet erosion to continue unchecked. Food interacts with the body, and the body interacts with the inner life. Treating food as neutral ignores this chain of influence. When eating habits produce heaviness, restlessness, or dependency, those states do not remain isolated in the body. They influence mood, patience, focus, and receptivity. Over time, these effects become familiar. Familiarity is dangerous because it normalizes decline. A reduced level of clarity or calm begins to feel ordinary, and the person stops questioning why things feel harder than they once did. The idea of neutrality also encourages excess. When there is no perceived consequence beyond physical fullness, appetite becomes the only guide. Appetite, however, is easily manipulated. It responds to stimulation, stress, emotion, and habit more than true need. When appetite leads without discernment, eating becomes a reaction rather than a choice. This reactive pattern weakens inner authority. The person becomes accustomed to being led by impulse, which affects other areas of life as well. Discipline softens. Intention weakens. The inner voice becomes quieter. Another danger of neutrality is that it separates the sacred from the ordinary. Spiritual life is confined to specific moments or practices, while daily habits are treated as spiritually irrelevant. This division fragments the inner life. Awareness becomes compartmentalized. A person may feel focused during prayer or reflection, yet scattered during the rest of the day. This inconsistency creates instability. True inner strength requires integration, where daily choices support rather than contradict deeper intentions. When food is treated as neutral, emotional eating often goes unnoticed. Food becomes a tool to manage feelings without addressing them. Stress is softened, boredom is filled, and discomfort is delayed. This pattern dulls emotional sensitivity. Over time, a person becomes less aware of internal signals, less able to distinguish between hunger and unrest, satisfaction and avoidance. Emotional dullness directly affects spiritual awareness because both rely on sensitivity. When sensitivity fades, discernment follows. Neutrality also removes gratitude. When food is reduced to function or pleasure, it loses its relational quality. Eating becomes transactional rather than intentional. This attitude seeps into other areas of life where experiences are consumed rather than received. Reverence fades. Awareness becomes shallow. Spiritual perception thrives on reverence, on the ability to recognize depth in ordinary moments. When reverence is absent, even meaningful experiences feel flat. The belief in neutrality discourages listening. The body constantly communicates through energy levels, cravings, discomfort, and satisfaction. When food is treated as neutral, these signals are ignored or overridden. Eating continues despite fatigue or heaviness because there is no framework for interpretation. Over time, the body's signals grow weaker. This loss of bodily awareness parallels a loss of inner awareness. The same habit of ignoring signals applies inwardly. Subtle warnings and promptings are missed. Another hidden danger is dependency. Neutrality allows repeated reliance on certain foods for comfort or stimulation without reflection. Dependency reduces freedom. When freedom diminishes, spiritual growth slows. Growth requires the ability to choose, to pause, to redirect. Dependency narrows options. The person may still desire depth, but feels constrained by habit. This constraint often manifests as frustration or resignation. Not realizing its origin lies in daily, unquestioned choices. Treating food as neutral also prevents contrast. Without contrast, awareness cannot sharpen. A person does not realize what has been lost until they experience something different. Neutrality discourages experimentation and adjustment. There is no reason to change what is assumed to have no deeper impact. This keeps the inner life static. Stagnation feels safe, but slowly drains vitality. Recognizing that food is not neutral does not mean assigning fear or guilt to eating. It means restoring meaning. It invites discernment without rigidity. When a person understands that every repeated choice shapes the inner environment, they begin to choose with awareness. Eating becomes an act of alignment rather than indulgence or avoidance. This shift often brings unexpected clarity, not because food becomes perfect, but because unconscious interference is reduced. The danger of neutrality lies in its invisibility. It hides cause and effect. It allows decline without accountability. It separates daily life from spiritual life. When this illusion is removed, responsibility returns gently but firmly. Choices regain weight. Awareness deepens. The ordinary becomes influential again. Food becomes part of a larger conversation with the self, where nothing is dismissed as insignificant and every habit is recognized as a contributor to inner direction, shaping clarity, discipline, and sensitivity in ways that are quiet, but enduring. The difference between feeding the body and nourishing the spirit is subtle, yet it defines whether a person merely survives or truly lives with depth and awareness. Feeding the body is an act of maintenance. It addresses hunger, energy, and physical function. Nourishing the spirit, however, is an act of alignment. It sustains clarity, purpose, sensitivity, and inner strength. When these two are confused, a person may feel full yet empty, energized yet unfocused, alive yet disconnected. This confusion is common because physical satisfaction often creates the illusion of wholeness. Feeding the body focuses on quantity, timing, and satisfaction. It answers the question, am I full? Nourishing the spirit answers a different question, am I aligned? A body can be fed excessively and still leave the inner life weakened. In fact, excess often creates noise that drowns out the inner voice. The body demands attention through heaviness, fatigue, or restlessness, while the spirit waits quietly for space. When feeding is mistaken for nourishment, this imbalance becomes normalized. The body responds immediately to food. The spirit responds gradually to patterns. This difference in response time is why the distinction is often missed. Physical hunger is loud and urgent. Spiritual hunger is subtle and patient. When the body is constantly fed without intention, spiritual hunger is masked rather than met. The person feels satisfied enough to stop seeking, yet unsettled enough to remain restless. This is not a lack of desire for depth, but a misdirection of attention. Nourishment of the spirit requires more than intake. It requires receptivity. It is shaped by how food is chosen, consumed, and integrated into life. Eating in excess, in distraction, or in emotional reactivity feeds the body, but leaves the spirit untouched or even burdened. Nourishing the spirit involves awareness, restraint, gratitude, and rhythm. It is less about what is eaten and more about the relationship with eating. This relationship determines whether food supports inner quietness or contributes to inner noise. The spirit thrives in clarity. Clarity emerges when the body is not overloaded. When feeding dominates life, clarity diminishes. Thoughts scatter, emotions fluctuate, attention shortens. The person may still function well outwardly, yet inwardly feel dull or disconnected. This is often misinterpreted as stress or fatigue alone, when it is actually a sign that the spirit is undernourished while the body is overfed. Another difference lies in intention. Feeding the body can be automatic. Nourishing the spirit is always intentional. It involves choosing what supports balance rather than impulse. This intention strengthens inner authority. When a person eats with awareness, the body learns cooperations instead of dominance. Appetite becomes a signal rather than a command. This shift creates space for the spirit to lead rather than follow. Feeding the body addresses immediate need. Nourishing the spirit addresses long-term direction. A person who focuses only on feeding may feel momentarily satisfied, but gradually lose a sense of purpose or clarity. Nourishment restores coherence. It aligns daily habits with deeper values. When this alignment exists, the inner life gains stability. Decisions become clearer. Discipline becomes natural rather than forced. There is also a difference in how satisfaction is experienced. Physical satisfaction fades quickly. Spiritual nourishment lingers. A meal may satisfy hunger for hours, but nourishment creates steadiness that lasts beyond the moment. When the spirit is nourished, a person feels grounded even when circumstances are uncertain. When only the body is fed, comfort depends on repetition, leading to cycles of craving and relief. Feeding the body alone often increases dependency. Nourishing the spirit increases freedom. Dependency arises when food becomes the primary source of comfort or stimulation. Freedom arises when food supports life without dominating it. This freedom is essential for growth. Growth requires the ability to pause, to choose, to redirect. A spirit weighed down by excess finds these actions difficult. A nourished spirit finds them natural. The difference also appears in how silence is experienced. When the body is overfed, silence feels uncomfortable. The mind seeks distraction. When the spirit is nourished, silence feels restorative. It becomes a space of listening rather than emptiness. This difference reveals which part of the person is being sustained. Feeding alone fills time. Nourishment deepens presence. Many people attempt to nourish the spirit while continuing habits that only feed the body. This creates resistance. Practices feel heavy. Reflection feels forced. The issue is not lack of effort, but misalignment. When the body is constantly stimulated or burdened, it resists stillness. Nourishment begins when the body is allowed to settle. Settling does not require perfection, only intention. Understanding this difference changes priorities. Eating becomes part of a larger vision of wholeness. The question shifts from what do I want now to what supports my life as a whole. This shift brings coherence. The body is respected, not indulged. The spirit is supported, not neglected. Life feels integrated rather than fragmented. Feeding keeps a person going. Nourishing allows a person to grow. Growth requires sensitivity, clarity, and discipline. These qualities are not produced by fullness alone. They emerge when feeding is guided by awareness and aligned with deeper intention. When the difference is recognized and honored, the body becomes a servant rather than a master, and the spirit gains room to expand, leading the person into a way of living that feels lighter, clearer, and more deeply alive. The warning that compromise often enters through ordinary habits speaks to the quiet, almost invisible way. Inner strength is weakened over time. Compromise rarely arrives as a dramatic decision or an obvious rebellion against values. It does not usually announce itself with urgency or danger. Instead, it slips in through repetition, comfort, and familiarity. What is done daily without reflection gradually shapes what is tolerated, and what is tolerated slowly reshapes what is accepted. The most powerful compromises are not chosen in moments of crisis, but absorbed in moments of routine. Ordinary habits feel harmless because they are common. They blend into daily life and escape scrutiny. Eating without awareness, choosing convenience over intention, seeking comfort instead of balance, all appear insignificant when viewed individually. Yet habits are not isolated actions. They are patterns, and patterns create direction. When habits consistently favor ease over discernment, the inner life adapts. Standards soften, sensitivity dulls. What once felt heavy begins to feel normal. Compromise often begins with justification. A person tells themselves that a small indulgence does not matter, that discipline can wait, that balance will be restored later. These thoughts feel reasonable because they are not entirely false. The danger lies not in the thought itself, but in its repetition. When justification becomes habitual, discernment weakens. The inner voice that once questioned begins to remain silent. Silence feels like peace, but it is often resignation. The ordinary nature of habits makes compromise feel invisible. People rarely evaluate what they do every day because it feels automatic. Automatic behavior requires no reflection, and without reflection, awareness fades. When awareness fades, values lose their sharpness. The person still believes in them, but no longer feels their weight. This gap between belief and practice is where compromise thrives. Compromise through habit is especially dangerous because it reshapes identity. A person becomes what they repeatedly do, not what they occasionally intend. When habits consistently undermine inner order, the person begins to see disorder as part of themselves. They may describe themselves as lacking discipline, focus, or clarity without realizing these traits were trained into them through ordinary choices. What feels like personal weakness is often habitual conditioning. Another aspect of this warning is that compromise rarely feels like loss at first. It often feels like relief. Letting go of restraint feels freeing. Choosing comfort feels kind. Avoiding effort feels practical. These feelings reinforce the habit, making it harder to question. Over time, however, the relief fades and is replaced by dullness. The freedom becomes dependency. The kindness becomes neglect. The practicality becomes stagnation. Ordinary habits also shape tolerance. What once felt excessive begins to feel acceptable. What once caused discomfort begins to feel familiar. This gradual shift in tolerance affects moral and spiritual boundaries. Lines are not crossed suddenly, they are moved slowly. Each small adjustment feels insignificant, but together they create a wide distance from the original standard. The person does not feel like they changed, yet they no longer stand where they once stood. Compromise through habit affects discernment itself. Discernment depends on sensitivity, and sensitivity depends on awareness. When habits dull awareness, discernment weakens. Decisions become reactive rather than reflective. The person responds to impulse rather than principle. This shift is subtle and often unnoticed until consequences appear. By then, the habit feels entrenched, and change feels difficult. There is also a cumulative effect. One habit rarely causes noticeable decline, but many small compromises together create weight. This weight is felt as fatigue, confusion, or restlessness. The person may sense that something is wrong, but struggle to identify the cause. They may seek solutions externally, not realizing the source lies in daily rhythms that quietly contradict inner values. Ordinary habits are powerful because they operate below conscious intention. A person may desire growth, clarity, and depth, yet maintain habits that pull in the opposite direction. This creates inner conflict. The spirit desires alignment, while the habits reinforce misalignment. Over time, this conflict drains energy. The person may feel frustrated with themselves, not recognizing that the issue is not desire but structure. The warning about compromise is not meant to create fear, but awareness. Habits are not evil, but they are formative. What is repeated becomes familiar. What is familiar becomes comfortable. What is comfortable becomes unquestioned. Breaking this cycle requires attention, not perfection. Awareness restores choice. When a habit is seen clearly, its influence weakens. The person regains the ability to decide rather than react. Compromise often hides behind the word normal. When everyone does something, it feels safe. Yet normal does not always mean healthy. Normal does not always mean aligned. The inner life requires courage to question what is common. This courage begins with examining habits that feel too ordinary to matter. Often, these are the very habits shaping the deepest parts of life. Changing ordinary habits feels small, but its impact is profound. When a person reintroduces intention into daily routines, they interrupt the quiet drift of compromise. Small adjustments restore sensitivity. Sensitivity restores discernment. Discernment restores alignment. The process is gradual, but it is reliable. What once entered quietly can be removed gently. The warning exists because habits are powerful teachers. They teach the body what to expect, the mind what to tolerate, and the spirit what to endure. When habits are aligned with inner values, they strengthen life. When they contradict those values, they weaken it. Recognizing this truth shifts responsibility from dramatic moments to daily ones. It reveals that the direction of a life is determined less by grand decisions and more by what is done repeatedly without thinking, and that guarding ordinary habits is one of the most important acts of protecting inner integrity and long-term clarity. The call to discernment rather than appetite speaks to a deeper principle about how direction in life is chosen. Appetite is immediate, loud, and persuasive. It promises satisfaction now, relief now, pleasure now. Discernment, by contrast, is quiet, patient, and deliberate. It does not rush. It weighs, listens, and considers consequences beyond the moment. When appetite leads, life becomes reactive. When discernment leads, life becomes intentional. The struggle between these two forces plays out most clearly in ordinary decisions. Especially around consumption, appetite is not limited to food. It represents the pull of desire in all its forms, the urge to fill, to soothe, to stimulate. Appetite seeks comfort and intensity. Discernment seeks alignment and clarity. The danger arises when appetite is mistaken for need. In that confusion, choices are made to silence discomfort rather than to address its source. Over time, this pattern trains a person to respond to inner signals with immediate gratification instead of understanding. Discernment requires space. It needs pause, reflection, and honesty. Appetite hates space. It thrives on immediacy. Modern life encourages appetite by removing pauses. Food is instant, stimulation is constant, and discomfort is quickly anesthetized. In such an environment, discernment must be chosen deliberately. Without that choice, appetite naturally takes control, not because it is evil, but because it is stronger in the absence of restraint. When appetite governs, sensitivity diminishes. Sensitivity is essential for discernment. It allows a person to notice subtle signals, small warnings, and quiet invitations. Appetite dulls this sensitivity by overwhelming it. The body becomes accustomed to strong sensations, rich flavors, constant fullness. As sensitivity fades, discernment weakens. Decisions become driven by craving rather than clarity. The person may still believe they are choosing freely, but their choices are increasingly predictable. Discernment involves asking different questions. Appetite asks, "What do I want right now?" Discernment asks, "What does this lead to?" Appetite